Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. This is BRN AM for Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. And our top story today, reactions to the new DOL Fiduciary rule. We have them. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Tim Rouse is the Executive Director of the Spark Institute, and Adam McMahon is with the law firm Davis and Harman. Adam, great to meet you. Tim, great to see you again. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and I just found out that Adam's a Pittsburgh fan, but I like him anyway. I'm just kidding, Adam. Let's talk about this new fiduciary rule background, Tim. And I want to start, we've heard a lot about it. We've read a lot about it. And I want to ask you, why is the DOL doing this and doing it now?
Well, the DOL wants to address conflicts of interest that are associated with advice that's given in the context of an employee benefit retirement plans and IRAs. That's a worthy and noble goal, notwithstanding the way they're trying to achieve that goal. The DOL tried to put in place a very similar rule during the Obama administration, but that rule was ultimately struck down by the courts. Following that surprise ruling, the DOL took incremental steps to tighten its investment advice rules without actually amending its regulations. Though those changes, although significant, did not revive the 2016 rule. It is clear now, based on the current proposal, the DOL thought much more should be done to resurrect the key components of the 2016 rule. What is interesting is that the DOL is currently taking this approach, even though the SEC and state insurance regulators have established a best interest standard of care for many interactions involving retirement accounts. Through its proposal, the DOL is making it clear that it wants all retirement advice controlled by a single standard of care, its fiduciary rule.
And Adam, I want to come to you, and I know I hate to put you in this spot. And by the way, I love the people of Pittsburgh. As we were talking offline, you can be fans of your own team, but still like the other person's, other team's city. So I certainly do. But I want to ask you, can you summarize what the new rule does? Because I think Tim laid out the why, but I think we need to get into brass tacks. Like, what does it do, and how is it a little bit different?
Yeah, and I think that's, any regulatory proposal, there's all of the impact, the implications, but the devil can often be in the details. So I'd be glad to share something on that. And I think probably the best way to do this, probably do a little bit of ERISA 101. So I don't want to take everybody back to school too much, but obviously many folks watching this are gonna know that ERISA is the federal law that controls retirement savings. And under ERISA, certain individuals who have special relationships of trust and confidence, those who exercise discretion over a plan, they're treated as fiduciaries, and they're subject to specific duties, subject to the duty of prudence, duty of loyalty, but they're also subject to ERISA's prohibited transaction rules, which control how service providers and fiduciaries can get paid. And since 1975, the Department of Labor has had a longstanding regulation controlling when individuals who provide investment advice will be treated as fiduciaries. And under that regulatory definition, there's some clear markers that define fiduciary conduct from non-fiduciary conduct. DOL, in its current proposal, would be eliminating that rule, and they would be creating a new rule. It has some similarities to the previous rule, but it is really an elimination of the previous rule and the introduction of a new rule that will significantly expand the types of activities that are treated as fiduciary investment advice, largely by eliminating those clear fiduciary markers that I talked about. Things that, for example, would have required advice to be provided on an ongoing regular basis, or advice in a relationship where there's a mutual understanding that advice can be relied upon as a basis for the investor's decision. And what they've done is they've introduced this new kind of facts and circumstances test, which covers many more interactions. And at the same time they're doing that, they're also making changes to what are called the prohibited transaction exemption rules, right? So if you're a fiduciary and you make an investment recommendation that affects your compensation, under ERISA, that is by default prohibited. But if you have an exemption, it can be allowed. And what they've done is they've gone back and they've taken a look at their existing exemption for folks who provide investment advice, and they're making those rules much more difficult to comply with. And they've also gone back and looked at some other exemptions, for example, exemptions that can be used for certain types of products like insurance. And they've said, all investment advice, we want it to come under our newly revised exemption, which has those more stringent conditions. And we're going to essentially take away those other exemptions that have previously existed, and they're trying to bring it all under one umbrella. That exemption, you might hear me say, is generally called PTE 2020-02.
Thanks for that, Adam. And Tim, I want to come back to you because many of your members are record keepers, service providers, people in and around the retirement community, and they do provide some level of advice or guidance along the way. Can you give us an example of advice that's impacted by the rule that Adam was so eloquently talking about?
Sure. And first off, the advice that's being the advice that's being impacted here is both advice given to the participant and advice that could be given to the plan sponsor. I'll give just one example of advice that could be given to a participant, and that is advice, for instance, if a plan sponsor often hires record keepers to monitor their plan and look for overweightings, right? And you know this, Jeff, from your past experience and your history. If they, for instance, see a participant that's overweighted in company stock, well, the advice to divest or to spread around that risk outside of company stock would fall into this category and would put the record keeper in a position of being a fiduciary. I'll let Adam, I know Adam's got a couple other examples too.
Well, Tim, thanks for that. I think great example. Adam, I want to come to you, get some additional examples I think you have related to the type of advice that could be impacted by this new rule.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the examples that Tim just gave is a great example of some of the concerns that Spark has had with this rule about the different tools and services and products that we offer that have traditionally not been treated as fiduciary advice under the longstanding 1975 part test. It would be drawn into that definition under the current proposal. I think, one of the things we often hear about, and something I think DOL has pitched this rule as being something specifically addressing rollover recommendations, which is something that was covered by their 2016 rule. They've taken some steps over the years to tighten the rules regarding when a rollover recommendation is fiduciary advice. These proposed regulations would clearly treat those as fiduciary advice. But I think one of the important takeaways is this is not just a rule about rollovers. This rule would impact not only individuals saving their workplace retirement plans, individuals saving their IRAs, it also impacts the advice provided to employer plan sponsors. There's just one test for all the different types of advice that go out there, regardless of product or however it works. This would cover all of that. I think in addition to that kind of diversification tool, diversification encouragement, a few other things we've heard about is concerns about plan sales, right? Plans are often sold, oftentimes to small employers with a default platform of investments. Under the current proposal, those types of one-time sales or sales conversations would newly be transformed into fiduciary advice. I think at the participant level, the other thing that we were concerned about, from a record keeping perspective, is a lot of time record keepers also make available other types of tools that they want to make available to participants, and oftentimes encourage them to stay in the plan, keep their money in the retirement savings system. The new fiduciary rule would also would extend to those types of conversations if they meet the regulatory test.
Adam, you mentioned the prohibited transaction exemption. How does that relate, or does it relate to this fiduciary rule that we're talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I think you're referring to, as we saw in the press earlier this week, the Department of Labor recently published a new rule regarding its prohibited transaction exemption procedures, which is just a great thing to say. It rolls right off the tongue, right? And I think a lot of people are thinking about there's prohibited transactions in the fiduciary rule. What is this new DOL rule on prohibited transaction procedures? And what this is it's their final rules on essentially how and when they will accept applications for prohibited transaction exemptions, right? The fiduciary rule would amend a number of exemptions, but ERISA envisions that because the prohibited transaction rules are so strict, the Department of Labor will need to grant additional exemptions. And this controls how and when they're going to accept those applications. I think in terms of this, Spark commented on those rules, had a number of concerns. We're concerned about some of the ways it might reduce innovation, product development. How it relates to the fiduciary rule, I think, is an interesting question. Obviously, if you're an advice provider and you're now a fiduciary, you need to get an exemption. This is going to make it harder. But I also think that the DOL, through its proposal, has shown that for advice transactions, they really want advice providers to be using this new prohibited transaction exemption, this amended prohibited transaction exemption. So to the extent they are willing to entertain other types of exemptions for advice, this might make it harder, but I really think through their current proposal on the fiduciary rule, they're really signaling to everybody, we want to see advice coming through PTE 2020-02 and not other exemptions.
Well, Adam, Tim, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about fiduciary reactions, and boy, there are a lot of reactions and next steps. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. We're joined this morning by Tim Rouse of the Spark Institute and Adam McMahon of the law firm Davis and Harman. Adam, Tim, thanks so much for staying with us. Really appreciate you hanging around for segment number 2 this morning. Tim, I want to come to you because obviously the retirement industry is glacial in terms of change. This is a pretty significant change, and I would imagine that within the retirement ecosystem, there are a bevy of opinions, a plethora of opinions. What's been the reaction from your members and others in the industry?
Well, Jeff, I can tell you that the Spark members are opposed to the rule, and we've communicated that in our letters to the Department of Labor. As written today, it would prevent or call into question many of the things that Spark members do today to service plans and participants. And we talked about a few of those in the previous segment. And these will negatively impact, these restrictions will negatively impact retirement savers. And even if it doesn't strictly prohibit a certain activity performed today, by simply calling it into question will cause many plan sponsors to simply choose not to offer that service. And as Adam mentioned, Spark has been particularly concerned with how the rule is likely to result in the reduction of many of the beneficial forms of participant assistance and the assistance that record keepers currently provide to plan sponsors as part of their clearly sales context. These activities promote healthy financial habits like starting a plan, adopting a well-diversified portfolio, avoiding early distributions. These are all things that we don't want to see disappear because of this, overly broad regulation.
Yeah, and Adam, I want to ask you, and it's interesting because you've got this rule, and I understand the rationale behind the rule, at least I think I do, but from the Department of Labor. But Tim makes some really good points, and I think they got like 19,000 comments, somewhere around there. I don't know how they're going to go through them all, by the way, and they're going to, they had some hearings. What's next in terms of this rule? It's got to get vetted, probably rewritten, I would think, as a result of some of the feedback.
Yeah, so I think first step is they have a lot of reading to do, right? As you mentioned, the comment period closed earlier this month, right at the start of January, on January 2nd. So right after we raised champagne glasses, we got to file a letter on behalf of Spark. And the DOL is going to be taking a look at those. They're going to be, thinking about the feedback they received and starting to work to get to a final rule. As you mentioned, they received a little over 19,000 comment letters. A lot of those, some of those are form letters, right? Things that a lot of people have sent in, but I think they've received maybe about 400 unique comment letters, again, including Spark's letter raising concerns with the proposal. And I think in the next couple of months, DOL is going to be looking to incorporate that feedback. But at the end of the day, I think the final rule is largely going to look very similar to how it's been proposed. There might be some tweaks around the edges, but for the most part, it was clear that this was the type of rule that they wanted to advance, and we would expect to see something very similar to the proposal. In terms of next steps, timelines, things like that, this is obviously a clear priority for the department. This is a clear priority for the administration. This was actually rolled out, unlike a lot of the rules sometimes in the retirement space, at a White House precedent involving the president, acting secretary of labor. They want to get this done, and we expect them to get it done quickly. One thing that is going to encourage them to get it done quickly is there's some special rules that say at the end of an administration, if there's an election and the opposing party can control both the White House and both houses of Congress, there's a special procedure under the Congressional Review Act, which makes it easier for that incoming party to essentially eliminate and erase regulations that were finalized at the end of the term. There's concern in an election year that those types of things are in play. I think because of that, DOL is going to move to get this finalized very early in the year in order to avoid those challenges. It doesn't mean DOL thinks they know what the election is going to what the outcome of the election is going to be. But with a rule this significant, they don't want to jeopardize it or expose it to those types of challenges. That's kind of the conventional wisdom in terms of timing, what we expect to see. And obviously with the fiduciary rule, we've seen, surprises happen, things slip. We've been surprised before, but I think generally the conventional wisdom here is that we would expect to see a final rule early in the first half of 2024.
And Tim, back in 2016, under a similar umbrella of the fiduciary rule, the industry took the Department of Labor to court, I think, to put a halt to what was back then the fiduciary rule. Could that happen again? Could the industry decide to revisit that approach?
Well, Jeff, back in 2016, Spark was not part of the court case, and we aren't currently planning to get involved this time either. However, we are seeing firms and other trades line up with the intent to sue the Department of Labor to try to stop this change. I guess the one thing that's different from 2016 is that the court challenge the court challenge from 2016 is now precedent, and I suspect that this case will find its way back into the Fifth Circuit, and that rule back then was invalidated. So I suspect that a lot of the groups that are planning to fight this in court are probably feeling pretty confident of their chances. However, as you know, Jeff, outcomes of court battles are always a hard thing to predict. But again, I think the folks that are planning to fight, the industry folks that are planning to fight it, feel very favorable in terms of their chances. So
I guess
we're not really sure what will happen, but I suspect that there will be a court battle.
Yeah, well, more to come. It seems like these things more and more bring up these types of issues. Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Adam, Tim, great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again.
Jeff.
Right, thanks a lot.
And that wraps up this episode of BRNAM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more in all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content, then visit our website. We're back again tomorrow with another edition of BRN AM. We'll have a very special guest and an important topic, of course. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.